Maybe a little bit going back before you were born, what made your family immigrate to Montreal, and how was their integration? Nothing like the programs that exist now existed, so what made your family come to Montreal and to Point St. Charles specifically? And how was that for your family?
I think basically because conditions in Ukraine were so poor, and apparently my grandparents had a parcel of land, and when they each died, grandmother and grandfather, there were 6 children, and the land was, assets were separated amongst each. And my mother, when she received this money, opted to go to Canada where she believed there would be a better life for her. And my father came earlier, and my mother traveled in 1930 with 4 children, ranging from 8 to 12. And then in 1931, my twin sister Mary and I were born. And so this was the beginning, and difficult times prevailed, yes.
And was the Ukrainian community fairly large in Point St. Charles? Is that why they chose to go to Point St. Charles?
It must have been, yes. It was quite large, and there were no Ukrainian churches at the time, which came later on in life, in a different period. But they, like say, the services on Sunday were held in a French auditorium where they would makeshift an altar and people attended. And so, yes, it was fairly large. Like in my classroom, there was always 10 to 15 Ukrainian girls, so that it was a large community.
Okay. Going back to your family life, you mentioned your father left your mother when you were quite young. You were 1 year old.
Yes, yes.
So 6 children, and she was on her own.
And depression.
And the depression. So how did she deal with that? What do you remember? What did she used to say about that? Did she feel ostracized by society at large? Being a single mom was certainly not something very common, I would suspect.
It was very difficult for her because, well, on one side, she was fortunate because while she was in Ukraine, she was apprenticed to a furrier and couturier, so she learned how to sew. So then when she came to Montreal, she was fortunate enough to get employment at a factory, which gave her a little bit more, maybe a few dollars more per week than other types of employment. So she, that's how we lived. And in Point St. Charles, the rents were not expensive. And so we just thrived on that, and because of my mother. But the times were very somber. There was like, no one was overly joyed because, well, especially in our home, no father. My mother out to work, never came home before 6 o'clock in the evening. So, and my sister took care of us 2 babies, and my sister was 9 years old. So the circumstances in the home were, like I say, stark. We ate, but don't know what, because there was not that much money. So difficult times, difficult times.
Okay. Did your sister not go to school, I imagine, if she was taking care of you?
She just managed to get 2 years of schooling, and then she had to stop because the others went to work, different type of jobs, you know, the 2 brothers, and my mother took my 12-year-old sister to the factory.
Okay.
And so the Stefania, she had to stay home, look after us, and be the housemaid, you know, prepare foods, and this was her, you know, obligation to the family. Right. Things were very difficult.
Okay. And did your mom ever speak about how she was perceived by the community, by the Ukrainian community, or in general in Point St. Charles? Was she looked down upon because she was alone raising children, or there was no time to even think about that?
There was no time to think of that, but one fortunate part in our lives, in all our lives, was the community hall in St. Charles Street. Okay. Because my mother went there. It was like first of all, a large lending library, and my mother was an avid reader, so she'd go there to you know, get her books. We went there for our schooling, so this was the center of everyone's life. So I don't think anybody ever had time to think of sorrow that, you know, they left their home. They were just too involved in surviving.
Okay.